Good afternoon, everyone. You're all very welcome to our Aware webinar this afternoon on mental health across the lifespan. We're just going to take a moment or two to allow people to join in. So take a moment to get settled and we'll get going shortly. So welcome to everyone joining. I can see the numbers filling in there. My name is Dr. Susan Brannock. I'm Clinical Director with Aware, and I'm delighted to be joined for our webinar today as part of our Aware Mental Health Week, Mental Health Across the Lifespan. So before I get round to introducing my guests today, just to give you a brief overview of Aware. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we do these webinars on the second Wednesday of every month. You can look back on our website to find previous ones and on YouTube as well. At Aware, we also run support services and education programs for people impacted by depression and those that care for them. So just a brief note on the webinar today. What we will do is have a discussion with our panelists and we'll leave time for questions at the end. So as ever, we may not get to your specific question. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can. And we'll do our best, as I said, to answer as many questions as we can. And if you're left with any questions after our webinar, please do get in contact with your GP or mental health professional. Okay, so maybe I will begin by introducing the first of our panelists. We're hoping to be joined by a third panelist who's on their way. So Oonagh Miller, lived experience expert, and Dr. Cian Ahern, psychologist with Jigsaw. I might ask you just to introduce yourselves both briefly. Maybe if I start with you, Oonagh?
Yeah, hi, I'm Oonagh Miller. I'm joining you here today from County Waterford. I'm a mum of 3 and I actually volunteer with Aware on the support line.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Oonagh, this afternoon. And Cian, welcome.
Yeah. Thanks. Hi, I'm Cian Ahern. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm also the clinical manager in Jigsaw Limerick here in Limerick.
Thanks, Cian. You're very welcome. Both of you are very welcome for our conversation today. So mental health across the lifespan and thinking specifically really about depression across the lifespan. And I wonder maybe if we might start with you, Cian, in terms of thinking about, firstly, what you see about how depression is experienced in younger adults. What are you noticing?
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, it's an interesting way to even maybe term the question how it's being experienced. I was thinking about this, and are we looking at factors that might indicate that a young person is experiencing low mood or that they're really sad, or how are they actually experiencing it in their bodies and in their lived experience from day to day? I think there's some kind of obvious things that people can look out for when it comes to a young person in your life who might be isolating themselves a bit more, or who might seem to have a lot less energy from day to day, or maybe is disengaging from some of the activities and hobbies that they've been interested in the past. They're the kind of higher level, kind of obvious signs that you might see from a young person. But really what I'd be encouraging is a real deep listening, actually. So if there's a young person that you're caring for or who's in your life that you're concerned about, or if you're a young person yourself even, it's listening, really deeply listening to what the experience is, and being in tune and trying to connect with whatever emotions they're experiencing from day to day. Because you use the word depression, whether it's depression, low mood, sadness, it's experienced very differently from one young person to the next. And it's not always something that you can see on the surface. So it really takes a curiosity and a humility, actually, that maybe we don't know exactly what's going on for that young person at all times. And that really we want to kind of tune in, listen to their story, listen to what's going on for them from day to day. And listening to the things that are bringing them meaning in their lives, and if there's something off kilter there, if you know a young person and you know the things that they really value and that they really love, and you see that actually their life at the moment is a bit out of sync with that. And you're seeing that actually there's other influences coming in that are at odds with the values that you usually associate with them. Again, maybe that's another indicator that something is up for them or that they're experiencing a challenge internally.
Thanks, Cian. That's really great. And I really like, as you said, there's what you said there about the humility. So maybe and the kind of curiosity are quite key, aren't they? So maybe trying to create a bit of a space where there could be a conversation about those changes that you've
Yeah,
noticed without kind of rushing into it. It's this or that. It's trying to maybe hear them out or create that space maybe.
yeah. Thanks, Susan. I'm glad that you picked up on those two words. I think they're two of the biggest words that I bring to working with young people, or
Mm,
even as young people in my life who I care about, or my own children or whatever. It's being able to take a step back and think for a second, okay, maybe I don't know exactly what is going on for this person at this time. Maybe I don't have it all figured out. Maybe what I'm seeing on the surface isn't actually a fair reflection of what's going on for them internally. And maybe I don't know what they're experiencing throughout the rest of their day when I don't see them. So that's where the humility and curiosity comes into it, is that we're not always jumping in with solutions. We're not always jumping in assuming that there's a difficulty when maybe there isn't one, or assuming that everything is bright and rosy in the garden when maybe it isn't behind that kind of surface level, um, their facial expressions or their energy from day to day. So it really does take a kind of an active listening and active humility and curiosity when trying to connect with the young person in our lives.
Yeah, thank you. And as you say, that kind of tendency we all have to kind of want to rush in with solutions, because when we see someone suffering or potentially in pain, we want to take it away, don't we? So I guess it's sort of kind of holding back on that. Um,
It's another really important practical tip actually that keeps coming up, is that
yeah.
in order to connect with our young person or in order to support them as best we can, actually the first thing we need to do is check in with ourselves,
Mm,
because where we might see someone who's panicking or in crisis or something like that, actually that might be triggering a lot of emotional difficulties for ourselves, and that's where we might be going to, and we might be trying to firefight something that's not quite at crisis level just yet, but because we might care really deeply about this young person and really want to resolve their emotional distress, it's important to remember that a lot of young people's emotional responses are very natural, very understandable. And what they need most from us actually is just to sit with them in that. So the first practical step there is to check in with ourselves and maybe ground ourselves and understand our own emotions so that we can then be grounded and calm when we're trying to explore these experiences with the young person that we're connected with.
yeah, great. Yeah, thank you, Cian. And I guess we might come back a bit later on thinking about more of those kind of techniques, or not techniques necessarily, but kind of ways that could be helpful. And maybe kind of coming to you, Oonagh, then kind of suppose I wonder if it might be okay to tell us a bit about your journey of
Yeah.
some of these experiences and
As you said at the start, my lived experience was postnatal depression. So I've 3 children, and I was first diagnosed with postnatal depression when my daughter was 9 months old. So for me, I always understood that postnatal depression was, maybe immediate or within the first few weeks of a baby being born. But my daughter was 9 months old. Um, I suppose, I had breastfed my daughter, I was weaning her, I was doing everything correct, but I just kind of noticed the period leading up to my diagnosis that I just wasn't feeling myself. Um, Fine with the baby and our bond, all of that, but it was more feeling sad, not getting as much joy out of, little things, not wanting to leave the house, not wanting to partake in any social activities, and just not being myself. And it was my husband who, with his encouragement, I went to see my doctor. And again, I wasn't expecting a diagnosis of postnatal because, my daughter was 9 months old. But I had a really nice doctor. She talked me through everything. And I suppose as part of it was the weaning. When my daughter was 13 weeks old, she'd had a seizure and spent a number of days in hospital, which was really, really frightening. And the doctor felt that maybe I hadn't dealt with that, and that, you know, I had the protection of breastfeeding to keep my daughter safe and close. And then when that was coming to an end, the depression and anxiety started. So I went on to medication, which I found really, really helpful. My doctor encouraged me to take a holistic approach and to go and talk with somebody as well. And then I had, you know, really good support from my husband. I stayed on the medication. I can't remember exactly because this is about 8 years ago, but I think it was for about a year. At that stage, I was back to work, back, you know, doing exercise, and the medication had done its part, and I came off it with the guidance of my doctor. Then fast forward when my daughter was about 27 months old, yeah, about 2 years old, became pregnant again, a planned pregnancy with my son. Again, I was very, very sick for the first 4 or 5 months, but it felt a little bit different. My mood, I noticed throughout the pregnancy, was low. So I was on no medication at this time, but I did notice that my mood was low. Now I was tired. I had a toddler as well, but I was aware of it. And then when my son was born, a tough labor, he was a very big baby. But I remember being in the hospital and not feeling the same elation as I did with my daughter. And, you know, I didn't overthink it. I was tired. But I remember I was quite anxious as well, and very worried about my son. That he was big, and the doctor had commented that, you know, his head was big, and just to keep an eye on the size. And I remember becoming obsessed with that. And my friend was a nurse, and family members that came to see, you know, I was like, "What do you think? His head is okay? Is it too big?" But again, I knew, okay, I wasn't being myself. I wasn't getting perspective. So when I did wait a little bit of time, he was about 3 months old. Again, I was breastfeeding and he was waking every hour. So I was so tired. But I went back to my doctor and I said, look, I'm not feeling like myself. Um, so I was due to go on holidays, and the doctor said, "You go on holidays and see how you feel when you come back." And I felt the same. I just knew, you know, I wasn't. I was sad, and there was a lot of internal conflict as well. Like I was feeling guilty, you know. And textbook, everything was great. You know, two really healthy children. I loved them. You know, a happy relationship. It was like, why am I feeling like this? Why am I sad? So I went back to the doctor, and again, I was prescribed, well, I was prescribed Prozac this time. So I went on it, and, you know, it really helped. And I stayed on it. And then a year later, or within a year, I was pregnant again with my third child. Under doctor's guidance, I stayed on the Prozac throughout that pregnancy. You know, I was sure that it was safe, and it was. Stayed on that. Then in between, like, that was a very busy pregnancy. We got married, we moved house, moved county, and my son was born. It was a completely different experience. Even the labor was different. You know, it had its challenges, but different. Breastfeeding was kind of the most difficult to feed. There was an issue with latch, but and he woke a lot, but it was different. Mentally, I was in a much different space. So I made a decision again under doctor's guidance to come off the Prozac. And this was just at the start of the pandemic. And I did, and I was fine. But yeah, they're my two experiences with postnatal depression with the first and second child. And it never manifested with my last child.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah, thank you. And it's really interesting, I guess, in our webinar, sort of thinking about mental health across the lifespan and thinking about the different challenges that people may face in different kind of role transitions. It's fascinating what you're describing, as you say, that really feeling not like yourself is sort of what's come through. And as you said, maybe one of the key things is that, as well as those feelings of anxiety, like the kind of preoccupation. So not having that perspective. And as you said,
Yeah.
you could really see that with the third pregnancy, that feeling really different. And I guess that felt more like
Yeah.
you were more able to connect in a different way. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. And get perspective and know
Yeah.
that, you know, my child is healthy and that there's
Yeah.
nothing underlying, or, you know, every kind of cry wasn't indicating something more sinister.
Yeah.
And it was like I found with, you know, my second son, when I definitely had the depression from, as I said, from pregnancy, you know, I was in a state of fear and constantly anxious that something would happen, or, you know, every cry was an indication of something bigger. But then, as I said, I was lucky. I was actually 3 different doctors for the pregnancies, but they were all so supportive, and really did help me. And I was lucky as well with my husband and my family that I was able to talk, and that my husband was very much aware of who I am normally, and then the signs of me not being myself. So I was lucky in that perspective as well, to have the support. And I do feel as well, I joined breastfeeding groups, I joined mum and baby groups. I think there's a huge amount of support for a mother or an expectant mother. You're going to the hospital every couple of months when you're pregnant, but then maybe the 4th trimester, and this is like the public health nurses are amazing to come out and check, but then later on you kind of are left a little bit on your own. So it is really important, I think, for new mums, if possible, and I know exhaustion plays a huge part, but meet up, go to mum and baby groups, go to breastfeeding groups. It's good to share war stories and to know that you're not alone and that other mums are going through the same as well.
Yeah, no, that's really key, isn't it? That connecting in with that support. Yeah, thank you. And we might come back a little bit in a minute or two about what's helpful, but really good to hear your perspective. And I guess it's sort of key. And you started talking about how you might start to offer a space to have a conversation. And I guess you're giving a different perspective of what it's like to be in it. And actually, it sounds really, really distressing at times, as you say. Every cry is a feeling that something is really wrong. And just to move to Dr. Declan Lyons, thank you for joining us. Dr. Declan Lyons is a consultant psychiatrist in older adults. I wonder, Declan, I guess we've just started talking about the experience of depression, and it'd be really good to hear your perspective on what you kind of notice in the people that you're working with, how depression may be experienced or expressed in that age.
Susan, you can hear me okay?
We can hear you well, yeah.
I had to join on a phone rather than the laptop. Apologies for the delay in logging on. So older people do experience maybe, symptomatically quite a different profile. And we often say that the atypical presentation is very typical. So older people may not endorse that subjective sense of sadness. They may talk about fear, anxiety. They may be more comfortable expressing their distress in bodily terms. So mentioning fears of illness or any physical symptom really can be quite magnified in the context of depression. Often people will talk about their memory not being as sharp as it was. So certainly we're aware that cognition and memory can be a key component of how depression presents in later life. People may be aware that their memory is less reliable. They may fear that they're getting Alzheimer's disease. They may really overinterpret and over elaborate that worry. So the kind of triggers we see for depression in later life, obviously, role changes are, they come thick and fast in later life, and transition and loss, and physical illness, I think, and grief, bereavement would be the top 2 precipitants of depression in later life for a lot of older adults. Not to say that everyone will get depressed in the context of a bereavement, but we have to be wary as clinicians and as professionals for people who aren't coming through at some level, who are immersed or whose level of distress is ratcheting up to a greater degree month by month. We have to be very aware, are we missing a treatable case of depression in the midst of a grief reaction, while respecting the fact that people have to take time to process a loss of a spouse, which is just seismic for people. I mean, it's absolutely devastating as a life event, as you can imagine.
It's interesting, as you say, that the changes that are happening in that life stage, and we're talking kind of a different across the lifespan, but the loss of a partner of 30, 50 years and the impact of that. And I guess, as you say, there's something really important too there, isn't there, about the normal course of grief and whether, and kind of differentiating whether depression as a clinical disorder is part of that, or what's running its course of what is a huge loss. And there's a lot of, I guess, trying to make sense of that. And you also mentioned sort of triggers, or I guess maybe thinking about challenges in older age as well. And I wonder, I wonder what you see as some of the challenges that older adults might face that might impact on their mental health.
I see. Do you know? I see. We live in a less than validating environment when it comes to age. Do you know, people don't like that transition into later years. I think there is a feeling that older people, are superfluous to the needs of society. Even in the budget yesterday, we're talking about, very much the aging transition, which is a triumph of science and society. Let's be honest, this is a major achievement, but it's perceived as a burden. So older people pick that up, these negative stereotypes that older people face, actually kick in at quite a remarkably young age. I mean, it's phenomenal how people say your most difficult birthday is your 30th. You can be really aware of this changing, and that seems to get ratcheted up year upon year, decade upon decade. So I think we don't live in a very age affirming environment. We don't kind of see necessarily the potential for older people have in terms of, say, contributing to the workforce. Thankfully, it's loosening up a little bit. We're not seeing, compulsory retirement at 65 kick in the way it once did. So there is a little bit of freedom that older people are having the choice. Some people really, really relish retirement and the idea of all this time on their hands. Other people who maybe haven't managed their own unstructured time terribly well, can dread it. So it can be a mix of reactions. But the important thing is that when it comes to work, and we are so identified with work, aren't we, in the modern world, that we really should have a choice, or part-time. It's not the only challenge. The older people, do face challenges, I suppose, in terms of income. We're again talking about thinking of the budget, and, people were nervously waiting to hear what pension increase they would get, because they are on a fixed income. They see themselves as very, very, very vulnerable, with very little ownership, power, or control over these kind of decisions. Access to healthcare is a huge issue, and again during COVID-19, the images of A&E and actually accessing quality healthcare is very challenging for older people. It really does put the fear of God into them. The word A&E, many people will beg not to be referred to A&E by the hassle, the wait, the chaos, and so on. And that's not the experience of everybody, but certainly it's out there. And it's not to say that there aren't opportunities as well. We have to talk about the opportunities of later life. We have to talk about grandparenthood, for example, which can be a fantastic role that many older people embrace with relish. Not necessarily minding the kids full time. That can become a little bit of an obligation, but grandparenthood and grandparenting in general sees the life cycle kind of complete. And I think many older people really relish that role. And also the opportunity for leisure and social connection is huge in later life. And, we come back to the necessary requisites to enjoy a good retirement, which is health, obviously, your physical and mental health, and obviously a certain standard of income. I come back to that. We're still budget day, so it's on our.
Yeah, it's certainly very present, isn't it? And I guess even thinking that mental health wasn't particularly mentioned in the budget actually at all, which is quite shocking, isn't it? It's just simply been omitted.
Yeah.
Deleted.
Yeah, which is
debate and campaigns, and there's been a lot of campaigns. I know our college campaign, for every euro that is spent in health, for every, 5 cents is spent on mental health. I mean, it's just shocking, but we have to keep up our arguments, our legitimate arguments, and about the connection mental health and physical health. Your physical health will be much better if your mental health is good as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Declan. And I guess it's interesting, actually. It makes me think that in the survey we had done in Aware earlier in the year, I guess we did see, physical health that obviously is kind of a key concern for people over the age of 55, but it does also come up in younger adults too. And I guess maybe kind of moving back down the lifespan, then back to you, Cian, maybe thinking about some of the challenges that you would see might impact on young people, and that might affect their mental health.
Yeah, it's interesting listening to Declan as well talk about the challenges of transition in later life, because I think I don't know if we escape it at any stage in life, because with young people as well, the challenge of transition as well as the social pressure that goes with that. I think throughout adolescence in particular, there's such massive social pressure and social comparison, this pressure to be perfect, pressure to show that you've got things together, that you're okay, that you're doing life right, um, that's really huge. Now, there's what I would talk about a lot is that there's a lot of the very kind of obvious traumas that can happen across the lifespan, particularly for young people, things like bullying, and relationship breakups. You see there's a lot of sexual assault. There's a lots of real kind of obvious traumas that happen for young people. But underneath that as well, in society, the society that young people have been placed in is this really pernicious pressure to succeed, to perform, to earn money, to achieve, to be really good at sport, drama, school, whatever it is. And there's this massive undercurrent that is constantly having a really negative impact on the well-being of the young people that we see, and contributing to low mood, to poor self-identity, to really high levels of anxiety. And they're the things that we're seeing day to day that are really hugely impacting. And the thing about those kind of pernicious pressures is that young people don't even see them happening. So young people come into our service blaming themselves for everything that is going wrong, telling us that they're just not coping properly, that they're labeled as snowflakes, or that they're seen as not having the proper coping skills, and when in reality what's happening is they're being put into this really sick society in lots of ways, and expected to, it's either sink or swim. And if you don't swim, then there's something wrong with you, is what young people are taking as the message internally. So a lot of it is really trying to switch that narrative, actually, and to showing young people that actually, if they're feeling really poorly, if their mood is really low, if they're feeling sad all the time, that's much more likely a reflection on the society that they're in, actually, and the messages that they're getting day to day. It's not an internal deficit that they have themselves, but it's more a reflection of the system and all of the pressure that is being put on them from day to day.
It's really key, isn't it? I guess that idea that we're living in a society, aren't we? That there's going to be social impacts, and there's going to be huge kind of effects on our mental health. As you say, this idea that it becomes individualized, and maybe when people are younger, there's this, they don't have as many experiences of that, so that's the natural go-to. And maybe it touches in a bit on what you're saying, Declan, about in older age, society isn't particularly validating to that group of people either. So there's not necessarily very positive messages maybe coming through. It's, if you're struggling, it's your own problem, and it's not great to age. And these are kind of the implicit messages, perhaps. And I guess maybe going back to you, Oonagh, there, I saw you kind of, yeah, it sounded like the budget resonated a bit with you. And I guess thinking about the transitions at different points in our life as well. And
I was just with Keen for adolescents. Like, I really do feel sorry for teenagers, at the moment in society. Like, when I was young, there was no mobile phones. So when you went in home, you closed the door, you were safe. Whereas now for young people with social media and mobile phones, like, I feel sorry because there's no escaping. Like, there's that peer pressures with them constantly, or if there is bullying, it can happen in the home. Whereas when we were younger, we didn't have that. So I do empathize, and it's something I'm very aware of as my children get older as well.
Yeah, it's a different environment that we're in, maybe. Yeah, with different pressures and different triggers to mental health.
I think you're right, Oonagh. That safe space is hard to come by now, because the social comparison is just always there. It's the phone might be beeping at 2-3 a.m. in the morning, and that's the society that they've been placed in. Again, I think that's the worry sometimes, is that we as adults, sometimes the narrative becomes, sure, it's the phone, it's them on the phone at 3 a.m. in the morning or whatever. When actually a young person didn't set out to do that. They haven't gone out to try and be up late at night or to try and engage in these behaviors. They've actually been thrown into a society where we've all got iPhones and smartphones at all times, the adults and the young people. And sure, how we don't know how to navigate that. Not a mind expecting our young people to.
Yeah.
And in the comparison there, Cian, it's interesting you say it, older people sometimes come from a technology exclusion, whereby they kind of feel marooned, they feel incompetent, stupid, that they just can't master or get with the technology. They see their environment changing around them, the post office closing, your bank branch closing. They try and maybe go online for shopping, and because they're mortified by forgetting a PIN number at the cash desk. So it's tricky. Older people have this sense of being isolated increasingly from technology, just as the way technology isolates younger people from authenticity, maybe, and real relationships. Older people are in the margins of that. We've added a new person to our multidisciplinary team in our old age ward. We have two IT teachers that come along and teach people, if they're interested for the first time, are they interested in learning email, how to get the most out of their phone, their smartphone, texting, just to go through that thing. So that's been very, very successful.
Are you finding a lot of uptake of that, Declan?
Yeah, I think so. I think older people need that time, need that one mission. Need the classroom environment still has some threatening resonances for older people. So if they have that time, if they're told that, look, if you drop the tablet on the floor and it breaks, you'll get another one. There's no problem. Nothing to lose by giving it a go. We some really, really gratifying results when maybe a granddaughter has received a first email from someone. It's amazing to see that.
Yeah, that's
amazing.
Really lovely. Yeah. And I guess, as you say, there is maybe some of the what we're touching on, as you say, that some older people, because obviously it's not going to be everyone, but might need that extra bit of time and a bit more kind of input into, like, this is how you might do it. And as you say, there's a bit of a fragmentation, isn't there, of our social contract, or the post office is closing, community spaces being diminished. So people are left kind of isolated. There isn't time to sit down and say, this is how you might be able to kind of do this new thing. And I guess then thinking about, I suppose then what can be helpful, we're talking about some of the experiences of depression and the challenges that you might face at different points in your life, and maybe kind of going back to you, Cian, just to think about what you've kind of, how you might work with young people and what's sort of helpful in that.
Yeah. Maybe just recapping the first couple of practical pieces I mentioned. One about being really curious and humble and really listening intently to the young person, and really trying to tune into what's going on for them. That's always, I would say, first and foremost, just super, super important. Secondly, to check in with ourselves, the emotional reaction we might be having to what's going on for that young person, and having a minute to reflect upon, am I acting out of my own emotional discomfort here, or is it actually what the young person is looking for in this moment? Are they looking for someone who's going to just sit with them, or are they actually looking for someone to solve the problem? And I think what you'll find is, more often than not, they're just looking for someone to sit with them. They're not looking for someone to solve that problem. The other thing that I'd like to touch on is maybe a change in our language towards young people as well, and a change in how we conceptualize or think of what's going on for them in terms of their well-being. So I think the dominant kind of reaction or response to a young person in distress has often been, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with this person? Trying to think of their symptoms and trying to think of some diagnosis that puts them in a category that we can figure it out there from there. And I think it's very alluring. It's very tempting. I think, thinking of my own kids, there's definitely times throughout the day where your initial reaction is just like, what is wrong with you? I get that. But it's trying to take a breath with that though as well, and trying to step back from that and think, okay, if it's not actually something that's wrong with them, if it's not a thing that's wrong inside in this child or this young person, have a think about what has happened to them. Okay, so that's the switch in language. That's the switch in how we think about it. Instead of what's wrong with you, what has happened to you. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of obvious things that may have happened to a young person, whether it's bullying or fragmentation in the family or whatever it is, a school transition, you know, really obvious things. But also taking a moment to consider, well, what is the environment that they're being placed in as well? What are the pressures going on for this young person that I can't see? You know, how are their peers interacting with them? What's the general narrative amongst their peers at the moment? Is there a lot of pressure to do well at exam time? Is there a lot of pressure on getting on the football team or whatever it is? You know, trying to consider those big pressures that we don't usually see, aren't always obvious, might not even be obvious to the young person. But again, just trying to switch that a little bit and trying to think, even when we're 99% certain that it's something wrong with them, that we feel is no, it's their coping, it's their resilience, whatever it is, trying to just switch it for a moment and think, okay, well, if it's not that though, what if for a moment it wasn't that thing that I'm always assuming is wrong with them? Is there anything else that could be going on here that might be having an impact on their emotions? I think that's what leads to a lot of light bulb moments, a lot of kind of realizations for you with the young person, where you're trying to figure those things out together, you know, where you're just considering, okay, maybe there's other stuff going on here under the rug that we haven't considered before. And maybe we need to sit with that and understand that and figure out, okay, maybe this is just a very natural response to something that's going on for them right now. Maybe if we think about it a little more deeply, maybe we can understand it a bit more deeply as well.
So normalizing maybe some of the impact of those different experiences and not kind of coming with an assumption maybe about what it is. Yeah. It's an interesting different focus, isn't it? That idea of what's happened to you as opposed to this is what's wrong with you, what's wrong in your brain type kind of question. It really makes me think again of older adults, of that sort of idea that you don't just become 65 and turn into a different person, do you? You know, you've got a whole life experience. So for instance, you know, this oftentimes maybe in terms of maybe depression, let's say they might be advised, oh, you should join a group, you know, in if you're 65 or 70 and experiencing depression. But that might be someone who's never liked groups in their whole life, would never dream of going to a group. So certainly isn't going to, or may have reservations about doing that now. So I guess it's kind of looking at the entirety of the person potentially, isn't it, and who they are. I don't know what you would think about that, Declan.
No, it's a very interesting point about that generalizations about people of 65. We automatically assume that all older people, by virtue of reaching that chronological age, are the same. You know, single homogenous group, and they are far from it. You know, the variety between people actually increases, not decreases, as we get older. So it can be a double stigma, as you say, telling someone to join a group. And obviously that's important we know social connectedness and preventing isolation is really, really, really important. But yet if we tell people to do that's the recipe, that's kind of a double stigma. It may expose a kind of a social reserve, or it's not their thing, as you say. But then meeting people who they will see as not their peers. They will see those as maybe essentially middle-aged, and let's be honest, 60 essentially middle-aged. I think the rate at which we say people are old, if we apply that label anymore, is thankfully shifting upwards and upwards, and, you know, characterized by need as opposed to an absolute chronological age.
Yeah. So it's helpful to not have those assumptions. There's going to be a huge difference between a 65-year-old and a 95-year-old and two 65-year-olds. So I guess we allow that diversity across the lifespan. We kind of stop when it comes to 65, as you say, and kind of categorize everyone potentially similarly.
We don't prepare people, and I totally get where Cian is coming from. I think it's very interesting, you know, about the challenges older people face, and there are about younger people and the challenge. There are active supports and structures around them, and hopefully they can you know, fine tune the language a lot more, as Cian is. But older people face a situation where their potential seems to stop. Can you be ambitious as an older person at the age of 65? People would kind of laugh at that. There are no educational facilities that solely exist for people over the age of 65. You might get a pre-retirement course of maybe a half day or a week or two or a day or two here and there. And again, coming back to the budget, taxes included and how to avoid it, that's a large part of these kind of pre-retirement courses. But yeah, those features that help older people reach their full potential are really not there. We're still in a very early stage, I think, of loosening up our social support structures to get the best out of longevity. Longevity is a fantastic triumph, but we really have to realize its full potential for as many people as possible.
There's something about tuning into the things that are going to be helpful, isn't there, at any age? And I wonder, maybe Oonagh, coming back to you, maybe you spoke a little bit about your experiences about what was helpful for you. I wonder if you might be able to speak a little more on that.
Yeah, for now, like day to day to manage good mental health. And for me, like poor sleep or lack of sleep is a huge trigger for my mood and a low mood or anxiety. So I really am mindful of the quality of sleep I get. Alcohol is something else that would impact my mood. So I completely eliminated it a number of years ago. I don't drink at all. And then physical activity, just getting outside, some fresh air, walking. In the last couple of years, I've taken up badminton and Gaelic football. So for me, getting out, moving, I find is really, really helpful. And then just, as I said, watching sleep and watching my diet as well. It has a positive impact from me on my mood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I would probably echo for a lot of people at different ages what you described. They're really kind of key things that can kind of go by the wayside, but are so central to kind of staying well, isn't it? And I'm just thinking, just as we're talking about it, just because I see a question here that comes up on it. So we've got time for a few questions, but so this is not necessarily to anyone specifically, but if anyone feels a pressing need to kind of answer it, because I guess everyone could potentially answer it, but what do you all think of the quality of foods and drink and quantity of foods and drink, specifically sugar, that impact on the roller coaster moods of young people compared to previous generations? But I would say that's possibly all ages.
Nutrition
for me, sorry, no, go ahead, doctor.
Go ahead. No, please.
No, I was just going to say, I see it like for myself and my young kids, eating unhealthy does have a negative impact. If you're having a lot of sugar, you're not going to feel your best. Whereas, I see my kids, if they're eating healthy and regular, it does have a positive impact on the mood. But I think, that's across all ages. I don't know, obviously there's a lot more food readily available now, but I suppose everybody had access to sugar at every age. But yeah, I think a healthy diet, as much as, and everything in moderation, it does impact moods.
Absolutely, yeah. And you were going to say something there, Declan, as well?
Nutrition is a huge challenge for every age cohort, I think, to get quality food, to get affordable food, plentifully available food, and I echo everything in moderation. And there are some slight benefits to shrinkflation. To be honest, when you see the Mars bars, that's a thing. I know one reason that's for corporate profits and that, but I think more we cut out some of those snacks and just incentivize and have visible alternative, healthier snacks in our vending machines or whatever. Really, really important. I think the message is there, but it's a constant, isn't it? With the readily available supply of sugar in so many forms, it really is kind of a true societal addiction at this stage.
Yeah. And just moving to something slightly different, just still staying with you, Declan, I guess it touches into an earlier point that you made. Someone is asking here whether you think that elderly people will be less independent sooner in life due to that kind of increasing digitalization of services like the TV license, the bank insurance. I guess you've talked about it being isolating, but I guess are we seeing a link between that and the loss of independence? It's an interesting question.
I think so, and I think I just think it adds particularly to that sense of isolation and separation from the world around us, which is really a really bad thing. And your link with essential services is kind of primarily digital at this stage, whether it be your PPS number, your public services card, your bus pass increasingly. So I think there are opportunities. I mean, it can put older and younger people together. Is it a bit like teaching an older parent teaching a kid to drive, a younger child or an adult child teaching their older parent to manage the internet? That can cause a bit of stress and strain. We need to advocate for more marketing of technology towards older consumers at a very crude level. I mean, technology is marketed heavily to the younger generation, but I'm just so surprised that for a generation that has the means and the wherewithal to perhaps afford it more readily, that it isn't adapted. The libraries have an excellent system, by the way, of tablet devices that are age-friendly, called the Acorn tablet device, and they are really, I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're really good, and you can borrow them from your library, and they're a superb device to get started on the basics of technology.
And sorry, Declan, what did you say they're called?
Acorn.
Acorn.
Okay. The GrandPad, which is a funny name, and the Acorn. And older people need, again, coming back to the fear, need kind of coaching and tuition, particularly around fraud. And I suspect that's another reason which keeps people away from technology. And we've seen certainly many stories of older people being defrauded. So I think that there really needs to be some concerns around that too.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's really helpful. And Cian, there's a couple of questions here that maybe are speaking to, I guess, perhaps a general theme about having a young person in distress, whether that's a kind of a younger child or really feeling like wanting to support a teenager. And obviously you're working Jigsaw, and there's obviously CAMS and your GP, but I wonder, I guess, any kind of a general response to, apart from what you've said in terms of things that you can do, but I guess maybe to speak to that in some way, because I guess there's there's a real concern there about kind of looking after a young person and maybe feeling a bit adrift in that, whether that's services or anything else.
Yeah, it's really hard to do, I think, is worth acknowledging first. Seeing a young person in distress, is especially one that you care deeply about, is one of the hardest things that you have to do in life. So I can imagine the distress that you might feel internally seeing a young person like that. And then also sometimes maybe feeling like they don't want to be helped, or that it's really difficult to help, can further make that challenge even more distressing for us as adults. I think what I would advocate for is some of it, we'll get to services in a while, but some of it actually requires that kind of patience and sitting back and looking for those golden moments as well, where you can have that connection. Because if we spend the entirety of our time kind of worrying and reacting and responding and asking what's wrong or asking how can you help, sometimes paradoxically that can actually push a young person away, because they can feel like you're invading their personal space or invading what they're already trying to resolve themselves. And what they need sometimes actually is just to know that you're there, to know that you're thinking of them, to know that when they are ready to talk, that you're totally emotionally available to them. And sometimes, again, that even as I say that, you might feel like sometimes you're missing.
Sorry, Cian, you dropped out a little bit there. I wonder, could you say the last couple of bits again, if that's all right?
Yeah, just talking about those kind of golden moments, those opportunities to connect, and how we should always be kind of seeking them out. It takes patience to do that, and sometimes we have to live with our own distress for a while to do that. But just to watch out for those moments, and even even when you feel like you might have messed up a moment where you're really busy, because us as adults and as parents are really busy all the time, we're not always going to be emotionally available. But even to say to the young person in that moment, I'm so, so busy that right now, I'm really sorry, but I will be back at 8 o'clock. I will have as much time as we need to talk through this thing, so that they know you've listened, they know that you're there, they know that you care, and that they know that they can come back to you and that you will be that stable base for them to come back to. And sometimes they actually need to have the argument with you as well first, and they need to give out and shout and roar first, so that later, when they see that you've held that and that you've been okay with that, you haven't fallen over by that you will be available when they are ready and when things have calmed and grounded as well. Sometimes it's the side to side in the car is the best moment to talk through, a difficulty, or to ask about a difficulty like that. Sometimes it's almost purposely trying to connect with them over something that they're really interested in. It's not always about waiting for the young person to really be excited about the camping trip or really be excited to sit down to dinner as a family. To actually, maybe if soccer is the least favorite thing you've ever done in your life, but your son is a huge Man United fan or whatever, maybe it's about just trying to get interested in it in some way, getting into the drama of it, or just sitting with them while they're watching it. Because that's when you pick up on those little golden moments where, up until it might be a whole week of really trying to help and being kind of given the wall or whatever, but that's maybe where there's a moment for connection, a moment where you can actually listen in and talk through something that might be going on for them. It takes a lot of patience, and it takes a lot of our own kind of willpower to sit back and do that. When it comes to services, like you mentioned, Susan, there is a course. There's Jigsaw, there's CAMS, there's psychology services, GPs, and at the same time, there's a risk of pathologizing a young person's distress as well. So I think I would always kind of firstly try and see what we can do at home, what we can do ourselves with our relationship with the young person, but always say it to them as well. Look, do you think that it would be helpful to talk to someone outside the family? Do you think it would be helpful to have a bit of space for yourself, where it's not your mom or your dad that's kind of asking you about these things? That's another way to approach it too.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Cian. That's really helpful advice. Actually, it's so central, isn't it? There's so many useful kind of areas that you've given, not only kind of services, and also maybe what's crucial is how would you feel to talk to someone outside the family? So it's offering options and it's meeting people where they are, I think is really key, isn't it? And just thinking about one of the questions that's come in, which I think is quite a common theme. So to add into what you've just been saying, Cian, in terms of talking with your young person, I suppose someone has kind of noted here, the challenge I face is, as a mother of young children, I'm also in a position of care for elderly parents. A lot of people are in similar situations. It's hard to juggle, especially when older people are feeling hopeless and invisible. I think that is really common, isn't it, Declan? So and I wonder what you might say to relatives and children of older adults, and kind of noticing that, the concern for them, and managing those responsibilities.
It's very difficult. There's no doubt that midlife has unique pressures. You're the so-called sandwich generation, with caring responsibilities towards older parents and young kids or teens. So it can be a time of extraordinary pressure. I think in as far as reaching out to older people are concerned, we always say show the interest. As clinicians, we're aware older people may come in looking for help with very low expectations. They may feel ashamed, embarrassed. They may feel they're a burden, that they don't deserve to have their problems investigated or taken seriously, or that there's other sicker people ahead of them in the queue. So I think showing interest is really, really, really important. I think we always would encourage family members to look at the older person's environment. Is the environment they're in working for them or against them? How secure are they in the environment? How connected with people? What is the support network like? Does the environment help them function optimally? Are they independent to the maximum extent? And we often say that the consistent approach with an eye, I suppose, to the practical assistance that older people may need. It may be transport to medical appointments. It may be collecting medication. It may be some meal preparation. But these things can make an enormous difference if they're done consistently. The older person isn't made to feel humiliated or whatever. I think that they're very, very, very important basics that need to be attended to.
And I guess maybe there is a similarity, isn't there, between what Cian's describing and meeting the person where they are, and the conversation might look a bit different, but I guess it's sort of a tuning into what someone might need and really thinking about their environment and how you might think with them around support for that. Yeah. So
it's crucial. And, we would say, look, I think in terms of the complexity of depression, we've heard how complex it is, highly expressed by our emotional environment. But obviously, with older people, it's very interwoven with their physical health as well. So we often say, be as comprehensive as possible when we're assessing older people. We try and exclude things that may be there and hopefully are not there in terms of physical illness. And we look at memory and cognition. And we also, a key thing is to talk to the support network of an older person to get information. That literally is what we call speak to someone's supporter and carer and get their concerns on board. That can be very, very supportive of those younger people that are in that pressure cooker situation of the caring responsibilities for either ends of the life cycle, because sometimes services can step in and services can signpost people to a lot of supports that exist in the community, and younger people may not be aware of that. Younger adults may not be aware of that that can take some of the slack off them.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I guess, as you say, to kind of let, maybe if an older person in your life is in receipt of services, to kind of link in with those services for more information, for support for you if that's needed. So thank you all for a really interesting discussion. We're kind of coming to the end. I feel like we could talk a lot longer about all the different aspects of not only depression but mental health across the lifespan. And thank you all for joining and for the questions that you've given in. I wonder, before we wrap up, before I get on to talk about the webinar next week, if we might end with maybe even a word or two about kind of what each of you would most want people to take away with them from the webinar in terms of what you've said. So I wonder, Oonagh, if we start with you, the kind of takeaway points.
Yeah, for me, I suppose it's for any new mums in the 4th trimester. If you don't feel like yourself, to talk to a loved one or seek medical help, that in that 4th trimester it is really hard, and to seek support.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Oonagh. And Cian, what about yourself?
Yeah, it's that switch to a bit more curiosity, a bit more humility when we're trying to support our young people, and a change of that language, that it's not what's wrong with you, it's more what's happened to you, what's going on for you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cian. And Declan.
Well, I would just say that, look, depression in later life should never be seen as understandable, because if we see it as understandable, we won't intervene or do anything for it. Don't accept, the lower level of function imposed by depression as the new normal. Try and challenge it and look for help. People have an onus also to remain engaged in as many aspects of life. Older people themselves have that, I think, onus to be curious, enthusiastic and engaged in as many aspects of life as possible, to squeeze every drop out of life as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, true for all ages, I would say. Yeah, thank you all for really insightful, really interesting and really helpful kind of discussion and points today, and thank you all for joining. So if we move to the webinar for next month, I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Clodagh Campbell, a psychologist of the Unspoken podcast, where we'll be looking at exploring anxiety. So that'll be on the 2nd Wednesday of next month. And in terms of our webinar today, we will send out a survey just asking for feedback. So please do let us know what you thought, and if there's any topics that you would like us to cover in upcoming webinars, we'd be delighted to hear your feedback. Thank you all very much, and hope to see you all again next month. Thank you.
Bye.